Jarrett, Chapter 13, the Cold War and Civil Rights. We're looking at the Cold War aspect of the chapter. This is Part 4. All right, let us continue with our look at the Cold War, and we're going to take a look at the Korean War today. And as you can see here, the Korean War was fought through from 1950 to about 1953. It started late in 50 and finished pretty early in 53, so it really was less than 2 full years. The story itself behind it, Korea is a former colony of Japan that was divided into two zones after World War II. And here are the two zones over here on the map right here, okay, up here in the upper right-hand corner. You have the 38th parallel right there, dividing North Korea, which was aligned with Communist China and the Soviet Union, and then you had South Korea, which was aligned with the United States. So here we have North Korea becomes a communist nation supported by both China and the Soviet Union. South Korea is a democratic nation which is supported by the United States. And as I pointed out on the map, the 38th parallel was the dividing line between the two. And here you can see you're now crossing the 38th parallel, either heading into South Korea from North Korea or heading into North Korea from South Korea. Okay. Let's take a look at our next slide. And we're going to be taking a look at the war itself. And what we have in the upper right-hand corner, again, the Korean War, is we have the early advance here in red. And again, we're looking at this map right up here. And we have an advance in red there from the north into the south. We have a newspaper headline, North Korea Reds declare war. Again, red was a term often referred to or used by Americans to indicate the communists. And down here at the bottom, Truman orders U.S. air and sea forces to support South Korea. Okay, 1950, North Koreans invade the South. And again, this would be that right in there. Okay, oh, that's horrible. That's not a lot better. You just get the idea, okay? These aggressive actions reminded President Truman, keep in mind President Truman served under Roosevelt in his final term, and he became president, and he was president at the end of the war. These actions reminded Truman of the Nazis during World War II. So President Truman sent troops into South Korea to resist the invasion because this is part of our policy of containment. We're going to contain communism where it is. If it's not in a country like South Korea, we'll do what we can to stop it from spreading. The United States was able to push through a resolution in the United Nations. The United States was able to get a resolution passed in the United Nations to send United Nations troops, which of course were mostly Americans, into South Korea. Now again, we weren't the only ones. There were a number of other countries who were participating. The Brits, for example, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, but primarily the bulk of the troops were from the United States. The Korean War became the first war to use an international peacekeeping force, United Nations, to try to stop aggression. So here we have an international peacekeeping force, the United Nations, and what was its goal? To stop the aggression of whom? The North Koreans. All right. So during the war, there were some controversies, and we'll talk about one of them right here. The controversy between Truman and Douglas MacArthur. Here's a picture of MacArthur right in there. He is easily recognized thanks to his corncob pipe that he carried with him almost all the time, everywhere he went. So Truman sends MacArthur to command United States forces in South Korea. And MacArthur lands at Incheon, and here's Incheon over here on the map, right there. MacArthur lands at Incheon, surprising the north and advancing toward the Yalu River on China's border with North Korea. So he lands here. Let's make that even a little bit easier to see. He lands there and then moves this direction. Now keep in mind, China, which is a supporter of the North Koreans, China, which is really at this time only been a communist-controlled country for 2 or 3 years, China becomes alarmed, as you can well imagine, and sent large numbers of troops to aid the North. Now again, we had been warned. The Chinese had warned the United States, do not approach the Yalu River. And here is the Yalu River right here, okay? It borders China and North Korea. We were told by the Chinese, do not send American troops toward China. If you do, we will take steps to defend ourselves because we think that you will be trying to attack us. So MacArthur wanted to liberate China from the communist control. He wanted to liberate China from communist control, and he wanted to do that by invading China. And he was even willing to use the bomb. The bomb, of course, is code word for atomic weapons. So the Chinese are alarmed at the large number of American troops heading toward their country right in here. MacArthur wanted to liberate China from communist control, even if he had to use nuclear weapons to defeat the Chinese communists. Let's go on to our next slide. All right, here we are, sorry. So, what's the controversy? Again, that doesn't sound all that controversial so far. Let's continue with the controversy. Truman, President Truman, Commander-in-Chief, right in there, and here is MacArthur, okay. President Truman, MacArthur's boss, disagreed with MacArthur over the issue of invading China and the use of atomic weapons. Truman, who by the way has the final say on this, not MacArthur, Truman disagreed with MacArthur and said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to invade China. We're not going to use atomic weapons on the Chinese. MacArthur publicly criticized Truman. MacArthur criticized Truman. Now again, was he right to do so? No. Well, let me rephrase that. Was he right to do so? Yeah, possibly. Okay, you could argue that we should have gone into China. We could have used atomic weapons. We could have gotten rid of the Chinese. You can argue that would be a good strategy, a long-term strategy. But was he correct in criticizing Truman? No. Why? Because Truman is MacArthur's boss. President Truman is the commander-in-chief. MacArthur is a general. He follows the commander-in-chief's orders. If the commander-in-chief says no, you don't do it. It's just that simple. That's where he made a mistake. So Truman relieved MacArthur, and over here it says it much better. Truman fires MacArthur. Truman fires MacArthur, relieves him of his command, believing it was necessary to keep civilian control over the military. Again, that was what our founding fathers intended. The president is the commander-in-chief of the military. He does not have to be a military man. He does not have to have military experience. In fact, George Washington never wore his uniform while he was president. Now, again, you can see in movies and in real-life situations where you have politicians or leaders around the world who are wearing military uniforms, and they got medals on their chest and on their sleeves, on their back, and inside their hat, on their pants. I mean, they make up medals and give themselves medals all the time. But again, that's not America. America is, its military, America's military is controlled by whom? America's military is controlled by the civilians. MacArthur overstepped his bounds, and he was fired for it. The end of the Korean War. And here's a little bit of a button over here. I like Ike. Okay, 1952, Dwight David Eisenhower, Ike, he's elected President of the United States. President Truman decides not to run again, though he could legally. He did serve almost the 4 full years of Roosevelt's term. He was elected to his own term in 48. He could run again. There was no law against it. But he chose not to. And so Ike, who was very popular, won. Again, why was Ike popular? Well, he was the commander of all Allied forces in Europe during World War II. He is given a great deal of credit, which he deserves, a great deal of credit for winning World War II. And he ran on the campaign promise of ending the war. The war had been going on for a little over a year. American public was unhappy with it. They didn't see this as being something that was going to be successful for us. And the American public thought it's best we get out. So in 1953, the United States and North Korea signed an armistice, essentially ending all hostilities. And armistice is a ceasefire. It's not a peace agreement. There is no peace agreement in Korea. And armistice still stands. This agreement, this armistice, called for a DMZ, a demilitarized zone, as a buffer between the two Koreas. Again, here are the two. Here's the boundary right there. It is still the 38th parallel. And so there is a buffer, okay, right in there, a little buffer right in there, that is supposed to be demilitarized, where the militaries are not supposed to be. And that was supposed to keep the two sides separate. The result of the war was that the border between the two remained the same as it had before the war began. So, were we, the United States, successful? Yes. Did we keep the North, the communist North, from invading and taking the South? Yes. That was our policy of containment, to stop the spread of communism into new countries. Now, prior to the war, was North Korea communist? Yes, it was. Its biggest buddy was the Chinese, and of course you can't see it, the Russians as well, mostly the Chinese at this time. So were we successful in defeating communism? Well, no, that wasn't the idea. That wasn't the policy. The policy was not to defeat it. The policy was to stop the spread of it. And in that case, we were successful in the Korean War. All right. The arms race. Got a little bit of a political cartoon up here. Still number one. Truman says Russia set off an atomic blast. If I have not shown it to you by now, I will show it to you soon. A video showing a world map showing every atomic explosion by every country that had atomic weapons from 1945 through 1996. And down here you have a little political cartoon. Guy over here with the club, and this guy has a spear. And basically he is saying, yeah, sure, go ahead and start an arms race. So again, that's essentially an arms race. We have weapons that are bigger, better than theirs. They want to get those big, bad, better weapons. And so we're now both trying to develop bigger, better weapons. So we'll have better, bigger, better weapons than the bad guy. Okay, arms race. And 1945, at the end of World War II, the United States was the sole atomic power in the world. We're the only country that had atomic weapons. We, the United States, refused to give up the secret of the bomb, how it is made. We felt that countries like the Soviet Union and other countries like Nazi Germany or the military dictatorship in Tokyo would use those weapons. Unfortunately for us, by 1949, the Russians had developed their own bomb through treason here in America. There are a number of documented cases where Americans sold nuclear secrets to the Russians. Many of them were caught, and two of them, the last two that I can think of, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, were executed for their treason. Now, why did they do this? Well, again, it could be just the money. It could have been because they felt that nuclear weapons were something everybody should have, and that way, just because we had them, no one else would. That would give us then the strength that we thought that we could then dominate the world, or the power to dominate the world, whatever the case may be. But because of the Russians getting a nuclear bomb, we now have a nuclear arms race. Both sides trying to build bigger, better weapons. During the 1950s, U.S. leaders decided to rely more on nuclear weapons for defense rather than building up a large military force. And again, this is a deterrent. The concept is called MAD. It's an acronym. Mutually Assured Destruction, MAD. Mutually Assured Destruction, MAD. The Russians knew that if they launched against us, we will launch against them. And if they launch and we launch, we all die. So I got a gun pointed at your head, you have a gun pointed at my head. Does either one of us shoot? No. Because in shooting me, you know my finger is going to flinch, I'm going to shoot you, and we're both dead. It's kind of dumb. Yeah, I know. It is very dumb. It is very kind of scary. But that is the world in which we live during this period of time. All right. Massive retaliation. Here we have a picture of Kennedy and I believe that's Brezhnev, both of them sitting on nuclear weapons, essentially both of them with their hands poised over the button as they arm wrestle. And then down here, oh my God, we forgot about the nuclear bombs. I'm not sure what that means, but you know, it is a pretty picture. So let's move forward. The U.S. used its nuclear weapons as a deterrent, MAD, to stop the Russians from attacking. If the Russians attacked, they knew we would launch. The reason this deterrent works because we threatened to nuke the Russians, we threatened to nuke the Russians if they ever attacked us. There's any number of great movies out there from the 50s, 60s, and even later on. War Games, oh, great movie. Kid hacks into NORAD and starts playing a game, which he thought was a game, a thermonuclear game. And essentially the computer, which now runs our nuclear arsenal, thinks that it's not a game and is about to launch missiles against the Russians. We do that, they attack against us, and it's all called massive retaliation. So by spending more money on nuclear weapons than smaller, conventional weapons, it was cheaper, for one, than a large military. And so we have these nuclear bombs, and again, here you have, Russian and the Americans, leaders, sitting on these nuclear weapons with their finger poised over the button, ready to push the button if the bad guys attacks. So the ability to massively retaliate was cheaper than a large military, but again, it doesn't always work in every situation. Soon we realized, again, because we're rational people, we're not crazy. We knew the Russians weren't crazy. We both understood that if we attack, they attack, everybody dies. Such mass destruction can only be used if our nation's survival was at stake. Again, could only be used survival at stake. So this is not something that we're going to do. We're not going to wake up one morning and go, you know what, let's nuke Russia. Well, the only time we would launch is if we had been launched against. 1957. Good year. And I don't know, here you got this kid over here falling asleep in their high chair. I was 2 years old, not the least concerned about the Cold War, and then the Russians launched Sputnik. Sputnik, the first man-made satellite in space. And I think we'll finish up with this one. This will be our last slide. Here is an image of Sputnik over here. The Soviets launched Sputnik in 1957. Sputnik, as I said, was the world's first artificial man-made satellite to be sent into space. The satellite was small and really did nothing, but it served as a wake-up call for America because they had done it before us. By the way, Sputnik was about the size of a basketball. I mean, it really wasn't very big. It didn't do anything, really. But the fact that they had the technology, the space technology, the satellite technology that we lacked, gave them an advantage that we felt was unsatisfactory. If they could put an object like this in space using missile technology, could they not put a nuclear-tipped missile? Could they not launch one and land one in the United States? Yeah, if they had missiles, they could put a satellite in space. And by the way, in a year or two, they'll put a man in space. If they could do that, could they not launch a missile with a nuclear bomb on it and land it in the United States? Yes, they could. Now we suddenly realize we're falling further and further behind the Russians in space technology, in missile technology. This starts the space race. We're already in an arms race to build bigger, better, badder nuclear weapons and other conventional weapons, and now we are in a race for space to build bigger, better, badder missiles that could then deliver nuclear weapons. And let's face it, if we could get into space and put nuclear weapons in space, that would give us a huge advantage over our enemies. So what did we start to do? Well, we started to place a much higher emphasis on science in schools. We needed more scientists. New York Times, Soviets fire first satellite into space. It circled the globe at 18,000 miles per hour. It crossed over the United States 4 times. And then a corresponding down here headline, school board sets vote on $16 million in bonds. Now money would go toward education, toward science and math. All right, as I said, we're going to stop it there. We just finished part 4 of Jarrett chapter 13. We are gone. Bye.